Hello, Svitlana.
Hello, Arne.
Today we are visiting Hungary. How is that?
You're right. We're visiting the Budapest Gambit
Nice. I love it. I haven't played it ever, but I love it. It's so crazy.
already. Awesome. So we'll look at a non-conventional opening this time, and I like it, and I have actually played it myself, even in classical. But yeah, it's the Budapest Gambit. It's non-conventional, but when it's used effectively, it can catch opponents off guard and lead to some dynamic and exciting positions. So it starts with the moves d4, knight f6, c4, and e5. So you've never used it, but what do you think about this pawn sacrifice?
Well, I love it, of course, because this pawn is just gone for now, but black immediately looks over to f2 and tries to get the advantage in the next couple of moves like that. And I like it, of course. It's
I
all
feel
in
like
the
you're just
fashion.
I feel like you're just excited because it's a gambit.
Yes, that's true. You
Always.
got me.
So you're right. This is one of the main positions in the Budapest. Basically, it starts with this, and um, taking for white is the only way to fight for an advantage.
Mhm.
Anything else already immediately gives like an equal position, at least, or it may be even better for black if white does something else. So, for example, on d5, can you see why this is not the best try?
Well,
Do you have a
I immediately would go for e4 to just block the knight on g1 to ever get out easily, and then, yeah, slowly
okay?
but
So you would
surely
go for
develop.
e4.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's not something I've considered. Maybe
Oops.
because it's okay. And maybe because it's this pawn, I'm just a bit worried for that pawn in the long run that it might get taken by knight c3, queen c2, and then some like bishop g2. So I would maybe be a bit worried for that pawn to
Mhm.
get lost a bit later, but still, I see why you did it. Basically, d5 isn't the best try because of the weaknesses on the dark squares.
Okay,
So there's the bishop can go to c5, it can go to g4,
which is
to
beautiful, yeah.
b4. Yeah, I really like the one b4 is like the computer likes bishop b4. I like bishop c5 because it targets the f2 square. It's standing there nicely for forever,
Mhm.
and you can later you can later go for some even like knight g4 type of
Oh,
ideas to attack there,
and then
and
f5.
f5, in my opinion, really nice position.
Mhm.
So um, I would like to play that as black. So this is what happens if white doesn't really accept the pawn sacrifice. If they do anything else, something weird like e3, you can just take, and once again play bishop b4. So very often this bishop becomes the main player in this opening, and later play something rather typical with d5, and position is totally equal, and no problems for black at all, I would say.
Mhm.
But as you mentioned, usually they're going to take the pawn. Most of the time, they're just going to take it. They're not going to do anything else. I mean, maybe if you're playing online, maybe somebody's gonna pre-move and play knight c3. But otherwise, I think everybody's going to take that pawn,
Good. Good for
and
us.
that's the only move if white wants to fight for an advantage. So knight g4, and here white usually defends the pawn by playing either knight to f3 or bishop to f4. If they don't defend the pawn, there's some lines that don't defend the pawn too. For example, like e4, then we're just going to take it and play on, maybe something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and so let's look at the knight f3 line first. So if they ever don't defend it, we just capture it back, and if they do defend it, we want to like keep attacking that pawn again. But first, there's one move which we've seen before. It's bishop c5. And the reason why we play this before playing knight c6 is because we want to provoke e3. So that's the only way to defend this. I mean, if you ever try something else, then black might even be better and just keep that pressure up.
Oh.
So e3, that's kind of the key move here, is to play bishop c5 to force e3 and force that bishop to stay locked in his own pawns. Then we go knight to c6. So we try to attack the pawn again. And if you think about it, white actually doesn't really have ways to defend that pawn.
Yeah.
They could try queen d5, but then we just play queen e7 and attack the pawn again. So white is out of defenses, so they might as well just continue normal development. And here is your question. Would you capture the pawn back?
Well, it's always very tricky if you ask me like this. Well, of course, if I capture, then the queen might go to d5 again, and I don't know how convenient it is for black. Maybe black can just play d6 after all of this, and everything is safe. But I don't... No, black cannot capture.
No? Okay. The correct answer is that you can capture, but it's better not to.
Oh, okay.
So, both work. Both answers would have worked. So basically, if you think about it, in openings, it's all about like some move orders, or sometimes even one little like change can make a difference in how the position unfolds next. So here, for example, we have a position where we're down a pawn, and where the opponent cannot really keep defending it. So we know that we will get this pawn back no matter what, right? And if that's the case, then I personally like waiting and making another useful move so that the opponent doesn't know if I'm like planning to take that pawn or when I'm going to take that pawn. So the better move order would be to castle here.
I see.
There's nothing wrong with taking. Well, a bit wrong is like it's wrong to say that there's nothing wrong. It's a bit unpleasant, this f4 move.
Oh, see, okay.
And just white has center, white has some attacking pieces for the future. So it's just that. So if we castle first, then we make the opponent make a decision already about what they're going to do, where this bishop is going to go, or even maybe we provoke some h3, because often enough, the opponents find it very annoying that this knight is here. And that just brings us where we need to be. That brings us where the knight wanted to be in the first place. So a bit of these like move order things can make a difference, can make you win a tempo, and just to give you a clearer idea of the opening. And so we castle first, then we will take on e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and let's say castle. What do you think about this position? Which side do you prefer it for, and what do you think is the further plan?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So also for you at home, of course, you are allowed to think a bit for yourself. Which side do you like better? Now, I'm a bit sad that white managed to get the king in safety, because there is no real attacking game anymore left. So all we have to do, out of a sudden, this exciting Budapest opening became a little boring. So I'm not even sure if I would like white more here, because I have the feeling that I don't know what it is, but it's very similar after all. But for some reason I have the feeling white has a bit more dynamic.
Maybe it's just a bit more clear about what white has to do. They have the center pawns. They have like e4, f4 maybe. So yeah, I see what you mean. But I'll show you one plan that I think you're gonna like. So
well, let's go.
I'm not gonna say that black is better or anything. It's probably equal. Maybe white is a bit better objectively, as it usually is in unconventional openings. But here it's not by much. So one plan that I like in the Budapest, and that I sometimes try to pursue, is first rook e8, just nothing, just useful move. And then, well, white kind of needs to decide what they do. They need to decide where this bishop goes. So what I've seen most often is that they try to develop it with b3 and then bishop b2. Of course, if they do something else, then you also need to figure out something accordingly. But this is kind of the most common thing I see with just developing the bishop. So then we play a5, bishop here. And do you see where I was going with this a5 move?
Well, you wanted to go to a4, of course, and destroy all of this a bit.
No, because they're going to take back with the knight. So that's not what I wanted. I wanted to play rook a6. So now I think you'll like this plan.
Yes, I love it now. I didn't see it at all. Yes, this is really, really cool. Rook shift, one of your favorite moves too.
Right. And then the rook can go, to h6, to g6. So, this plan might not always be feasible to do. I don't know, if white starts playing f4, then yeah, we don't have time for such things. But if white plays slowly, plays some a3, plays some b3, then you can think about this rook lift through a6 to the other side of the board. I think in my game, I've only had it happen once. Like, I've only got a chance to do it once in a classical game. But it's just a cool idea to know, and that gives you some hope for a future attack.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Okay, so we looked at the knight f3 line, which is a bit like calm, this one. So if white defends it this way, it's a bit of a calm line, and it's not much like attack going on for black or for white. But it's still good. I like the fact that we kind of prevented that bishop from coming out, and it's safe because you win back the pawn, no issue, no troubles, and then you just play on in the middle game. But what we haven't looked at yet is if white begins with bishop to f4. So here, how do you think we react based on the previous ideas that we saw?
I would react like this. And then I would just get my knight out and maybe the bishop to c5. I mean, I don't know. I don't see too much trouble here.
Yeah, knight to c6 is the best move.
Yeah.
So if anybody said that, that's correct. It was a trick that bishop c5 is not good anymore.
Oh, it's a trick.
Because, well, not really a trick, because e3 and the knight has no good squares.
Oh no. Okay.
Right. So, and plus bishop c5 doesn't have the same purpose anymore.
Yes.
In the sense that we don't block that bishop, it's not really the same threat anymore. So that's why in every move, even if you memorize it in one of the lines, it's best to understand why it happened, just so that you don't mix anything up and you play it in a different line where it doesn't work at all. So here, bishop c5 is not good anymore, and you get your knight trapped with e3. So here, knight c6 is the best move. I have one dubious line that I've played. Sometimes it's g5.
That is so dubious.
I'm not going to say it's good because it's not the best. It's maybe like +1 for white. So, it's not the best.
Yes.
But I've played it before. It has some more like just like more spicy ideas than the other lines. And the reason why it's not good, I can tell you right away, is that if white, does a normal development and everything, and then plays some h4.
Oh.
So white needs to play like this h4 move. Then structurally, it's not good for black. Just like based on structure, you sometimes have to sacrifice that pawn. You sometimes have to lock it with g4, and then white locks it with h5. So structurally, it's favorable for white, which is why it gives +1. But, +1 doesn't stop some players. It doesn't stop me sometimes. So I've played this dubious g5 line sometimes. So that's just if somebody wants to look at, something different and maybe a bit more on the risky side. In blitz and rapid, for sure. Like, certainly, not even like, it doesn't matter. There, +1 doesn't matter. But it matters if you know the ideas and if you feel comfortable in the position and if you like the tactical mess that starts. I think that's what makes it worth playing sometimes. But I will not be a huge proponent of g5 because after all, it's not the best move. It's a bit of a dubious line. So I will suggest knight to c6, logical move to just attack the pawn. Then white plays knight to f3. So you see, in a way, it's an improved version of from before because now the bishop came out. So it's a bit.
I see. Okay.
Before white was forced to play e3, now they're not. So now the bishop is out and it's doing something useful here, protecting the pawn. So instead of the bishop going to c5, now it has no purpose. The bishop goes to b4. Also an idea that we see a lot. This dark squared bishop is quite important in these lines to give this check. And I can show maybe one trick. It's not really a trick, but that's one of the first tricks I learned when I learned this gambit when I was a child. It's just like it's just a trick. It's not going to always work. But for example, so white protects against the check. We attack the pawn again, and do we want to capture it back? And logical move for white is to kick away your bishop. Now, guess what we're gonna do now?
I see it. But if you wouldn't have said, like, guess what we're doing now, I wouldn't have seen it.
So what is it?
Of course, we can just leave the bishop there.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. And we can actually, if white falls for it, we can threaten checkmate, which is quite cute.
Yeah. So leave the bishop there, and we do what?
We take on e5 with the knight.
Exactly. And on the bishop getting taken, we have knight to d3.
And we win the bishop.
Exactly. It's a childish trick, but it's just fun to know.
Yeah.
Maybe gonna work in bullets or something. But of course, white can protect against it by playing e3 or by also capturing on e5. So that's something worth knowing is that if they capture everything there, then yes, we also have to capture everything and then have a little boring equality. But equality is not always bad. You just, you play on its pretty safe position. But yeah, so that's just kind of a little trick. And if they play e3, then I would even say it's pretty pleasant what we get here because they can capture with the queen, but then we'll take on d2 and the king is a bit weird. And if they capture back with the pawn, then we at least ruined the pawn structure, and then we can keep going with the initiative because I'm not sure where white is going to castle safely. So
true.
Probably they would have to castle along, and then we also have our bishop come out. So it's it's just a game after that with counterplay. So this was a bit about the bishop f4 line. Of course, it's not always going to happen that way. They're not always going to play this like a3 trick. They might also play knight here. And here there's two options. You can take on c3. This is by the engine. This is considered best. You can also play queen here, which is just like more logical based on the previous ideas. But it's just considered a little bit worse. But I think bishop c3 is actually fine. So at first you don't want to give away like your good piece, but after a while, like basically the idea is that you want to win back the pawn, and if you win it back, then these two become like even further weaknesses to attack. And
I quite like the idea of also exchanging the black squared bishop when you're black against some kind of queen's gambit or something similar. I think it's a quite nice idea, and I got this from Michael Adams. He didn't tell to me directly, but you showed it in one example many years ago, and I thought like,
you still remember it. That's good. So it's not really a problem, but the thing is that white can protect the pawn and hold on to it for even longer. And we need to do something quickly, because if we don't, they're going to play h3, and the knight doesn't have any good squares.
Oh.
So what we do is we actually just end up making a sacrifice. So we threaten to take it. So instead, white has to take it. And if you think about this position, I feel like there's some counterplay to play for. Yes, it's a pawn. So this is one of those very few lines where you actually end up without the pawn. You didn't have to go for this bishop c3. You could just play queen e7. But that's just a line where you play without a pawn. To me, it doesn't feel like you're playing without a pawn because these two guys are basically one pawn. So, you know, the way you count pawns is like how many of them can like even become a threat, how many of them can ever become a passed pawn. And these guys are kind of just one pawn instead of two. So it's a little bit better for white, but not by much. So I would say it's really playable, and especially if you want to keep up the initiative, have a better development, this could be an option. But it's this one is not one of my favorite lines in the Budapest. So it's just an option against this bishop b4 line, and just an option to play for against the two weak pawns. So that kind of covers most of the lines in the Budapest Gambit. As you can see, it's not a very big theory-filled opening. A lot of it is just about getting that pawn back, actually, after you willingly sacrificed it. But there are some tricks. We saw some tricks. We saw some middle game ideas. So what do you think about this opening now? Do you have any questions about it?
There's, of course, also a lot of tiny little traps, but I think we covered this in one of our very first episodes even. But I could be wrong by this. I would have to check myself.
We covered the when we did a lesson on opening traps.
Ah, yes.
I think I showed one of the traps there.
Yes, that might be the memory I just got about this. You are absolutely right. Yes. Well, it's also so nice. I'm very happy you're showing a couple of opening strategies against those common openings like d4, c4, because sometimes you don't like to play against them that much, and once you know the Budapest a little bit better, then it gets a bit easier.
We also looked at two knights tango. So I tried. No, not this is not the two knights tango.
No, that's a drunken two knights tango.
So I mean, I really like unconventional openings against conventional openings like this. And as black, it's kind of risky because the engine doesn't like you if you play something like that as black. As white, you can do whatever you want, but as black, sometimes it's a bit risky. But I feel like some tiny differences in evaluation don't matter if you like enjoy the position and if you feel like confident in these openings. And normally, such openings like the Budapest, they're not complicated to learn at all, and it can be like a weapon for a long time, or it can be a surprise weapon to throw in every once in a while.
I like it. Thank you so much, Svitlana, for teaching us the Budapest Gambit a little bit. Hope you enjoyed it at home. We see each other soon enough. Bye bye.